Okay, so to answer my main question, I first wanted to look into how you characterise peri-urban spaces, so looked at quite a lot of the literature around that, and then I wanted to look into how Bangalore's climate was changing, if at all, and how these changes, both these socioeconomic and climatic changes, were affecting livelihoods and health and well-being of the people in the peri-urban space. What people are doing to cope with this situation, and maybe come up with some recommendations, but initially it's insights into what's going on. My first bit of work was to look into conceptualizations of peri-urban spaces. So a lot of the literature at first was saying that it's a geographic location, so anything is peri-urban if it's on the edge of a city. But more critical literature or views of this space is one that is in transition, and it's a process, and it's a flow of services and goods between rural and urban, characterised by a very diverse mixed population, where you have maybe informal settlements of in-migration coupled with elite kind of farmhouses and very luxurious apartment blocks. All side by side, which you can see in the picture that I took in the south of the city. So changes in land use from rural to urban, from farmland to residential complexes. They typically lack access to basic services like water and sanitation from municipal supply, for example. And others have also highlighted how the health implications of these spaces include typically rural or diseases of poverty, as well as diseases of affluence, being so close to the city centre, where you have cases of diabetes and cancer, along with diarrhea and dysentery. So they're very dynamic socioeconomic systems where a lot of stresses and pressures are in existence. And one very important paper that I came across was this one by Kinter and Drescher, which identified 5 typologies of peri-urban spaces where you have chain migration, so villages from rural areas who come in and settle. So that would be chain migration, they all stay and maintain that community spirit but are on the peripheries, and then you have villages that are being absorbed by expanding cities like Bangalore. So, yeah. So a lot of you will know about the water situation in Bangalore, but this is the part that I needed to look at. So historically, Bangalore has relied on a system of tanks or man-made lakes for its water supply. But over time, people looked further away to get their water from the Kaveri River, and is piped in from 100 kilometres away up 500 metres at an extortionate price to BOSSB. And not only that, but there's a huge reliance on groundwater, which is declining very rapidly. And even if you have pipe supply, you also rely on a bore well as well. So, and then obviously there's the water tankers, which are particularly dominant in the peripheries of the city, as they lack pipe supply. So you can see in the 3D map the level of groundwater in Bangalore, particularly well, north, south, east, is particularly low in those areas. Pipe supply up until 2012 is in the map, second from the left, and then tankers with Vartul Lake in the background, and then Nadahali tank on the right. Oh, and the decline in water bodies from 92 to 2009 across the top. So you can see a huge loss of water bodies. Okay, so now changing climate in Bangalore. Historic trends, so the top left-hand graph shows a rise in temperatures over the region of Bangalore. This is from the ASAR project. So the space is not just focused on Bangalore, but a wider area covering Bangalore, and a decline in precipitation over the Kaveri River. And then projections for the future. A lot of people say that temperatures will continue to rise, and that rainfall will become more intense and variable. One paper specifically looking at Indian river systems acknowledges that water yield in the Kaveri Basin is predicted to decline, which could have potential implications for BWSSB and this pipe supply to Bangalore as well. Even though precipitation may increase, the increase in evapotranspiration will mean the water yield is less. And this is also exacerbated by the fact we have the urban heat island effect, which is a huge contributor to rising temperatures in Bangalore, with declining water bodies, declining vegetation, leading to, I think, about 50% of the rise of temperature in Bangalore is due to urban heat island effect. Okay, so all of this contributes to vulnerability and risk and an impact on people's well-being, particularly those on the peripheries of the city. So I don't know if I should go into this in a lot of detail, but vulnerability being a function of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity, being how likely it is a system or community is going to be affected. That being exposure, sensitivity to what degree the system will be affected, and then adaptive capacity being how able the system or the group of people are able to respond to this stress or challenge. Yeah, and vulnerability, some people have also talked about vulnerability export, where you can export your own vulnerability and impose it on other people. So for example, you export the fact that production happens in the production of like factory work and garment factories and things, exported to India in the peripheries of Bangalore, so that people in Britain, for example, can get the clothes, but we don't have to have the pollution, things like that. So our vulnerability is reduced while others is increased. And this study, kindly handed to me by Tanvi, demonstrates this whole situation in one diagram. So you have the political economy driving peri-urban dynamics, coupled with global environmental change, influencing levels of poverty and risk and vulnerability, and in this case focused on water-based ecosystems. And in this case, Desakota means town, village in an Indonesian local dialect. So this is a framework I'm thinking of using to frame my analysis. So getting on to the research I actually did, I went to 3 sites in peri-urban Bangalore, one to the north, one to the south, and one to the east. This is because I wanted to gain an insight into get an insight into what was happening in a variety of places and not just focus on one, because I think get more of a broad understanding. And these were selected because of the declining groundwater from the maps that I looked at, the fact that they were incorporated into BMP in 2007, and that some of them were located near to polluted water bodies like Vartor. And looking at Google satellite images, looking at over time how the land has changed and the land use has changed as well. So I used purposive sampling to make sure that I selected people who had lived there a long time, who'd seen the changes, and their type of houses that they lived in as well. Because I primarily wanted to focus on poorer groups to understand how they were perceiving the changes. And I did about 8 to 10 interviews in each site, and about 18 key informant interviews with people from BWSSB, people here, people at the Climate Change Centre. Yeah. So households, most households have about 5-6 people. They lived there for about 30 years. Quite a wide range of residents either had lived there permanently their whole lives, or had migrated in from either North Karnataka because of failing rains, and they primarily lived in informal settlements, or from neighbouring towns who would come for work opportunities to a bigger city, and also out-migration, which was quite interesting, from people who had lived in the centre of Bangalore their whole lives, but as in the 1990s, as prices started to rise, moved out because they could no longer afford the rent in the centre of the city. Majority all worked as casual labour, in construction work or as drivers, and some were still farming around Bartord as well. And one thing that came out of this was how variable their occupations were. Their salaries were, their incomes were. So an average income was between 2,000 and 15,000, and nearly all the heads of households were illiterate. So getting on to actual water and sanitation, so I wanted to understand people's current water situation now and what they previously had. So a lot of people relied on bottled water and community bore wells from a tap, from a communal tap, followed by tankers, and some either went to neighbours' bore wells or they had their own. One gentleman had his own bore well. And then, so it's interesting to note how prior to that, a lot of people had their own wells. So this illustrates the decline in groundwater levels. And many people recognised that it was due to the fact that all these residential apartments had come up and were drilling bore wells beneath their apartments and taking away their water access. And then looking at domestic water supply, so most people relied on community bore wells, either tapped, kind of communal tap or piped to the outside of their homes. In terms of sanitation, most had a toilet, most had a pit latrine, which was either dry or they had a honeysucker to come in to remove the waste. But 25% of these shared their facilities with up to 9 households, which, if you go by joint monitoring programme of World Health Organization and UNICEF, would be considered unimproved by their standards. 15% practiced open defecation, and 75% released grey water just into the open drains, into stormwater drains. And some of the pipes that were connected were just leaking. So climate perceptions, it was a universal, pretty much, finding that people thought there were higher temperatures and lower rainfall within Bangalore, and also unpredictable or unclear seasons as well. Farmers said they couldn't plan anymore, but to be a farmer, you had to know the seasons, so they had to just go with it. So changes to the surroundings. The majority of people said that there were both good and bad reasons for the changes. Most were related to job opportunities, the fact that construction brought more work, more income, and so that was good. And some people said that water and sanitation services had improved, but there was a much bigger list of bad. So people said the increase in population had led to an increase in solid waste disposal, which had not been collected, but also a lack of drainage facilities, so people were just building houses or moving in and releasing their waste into the open, into lakes and things like that. Increase in air pollution and dust, so the lorry going through Vartor is just one of many, many lorries going through the tiny village lanes outside people's homes, which people didn't seem to like too much. Some people said that improved public services was a good thing about the changes, but quite a few people also said that they were too expensive. So they were there, they were available to them, but they couldn't actually use them. And obviously, an increase in competition over water as well. So more people moving in, needing the bore wells, or waiting at the taps and things like that. And when I asked them about whether the government could help or improve the situation, over half of them said there was a lack of faith in the government and that they only came during elections. That's the only time they saw them. So some of the main challenges coming out of my research was the price of water, so those who bought bottled water, particularly as a lot of the salaries go up and down all the time, particularly throughout seasons. increasing competition between users. As new people come in, they increase the amount of time that people have to wait at the tap for water. Interestingly, some of the groups in the informal settlements said that as more people are coming from North Karnataka, there's an increase in competition for work, so in construction work. So they were deliberately taking less water than they could so that they could get to the job quicker, which obviously has huge implications for hygiene practice and health, but their income is more important to them than that. Many people said that the times that the water was available was between 4 and 6 in the morning, or 11 and 12 at night, so they had to stay up very late, get up out of bed, that sort of thing to get water. Poor quality, particularly in rainy season, or they complained of soil and a funny taste, which affected how much they drank and things like that. Lack of drainage and a rise in mosquitoes. Nearly everybody said that there was a huge increase in mosquitoes over the changes, over the years. So yeah. And some said that if they had less water, then I wanted to find out who was affected as a result, and so people were saying that if they have less water, they might not send the smaller children to school because they haven't been able to wash, and things like that. So yeah, and obviously there's huge issues when it comes to open defecation in terms of security for women and girls particularly, and just indignity as you don't have a safe space. So ways forward, some might argue from BW versus B that you should supply more water and get piped water supply from further afield. So this is something that they're seriously thinking of doing from the Western Ghats, which would not only have huge implications ecologically, but also how you pay for this. And if this is supposed to benefit peri-urban poor, how are they going to pay for this? And this is something that we've already seen with the Greater Bangalore Water Project in 2003, where people paid for pipes and are still waiting for their water. Other solutions from a supply side would perhaps be restoration of tanks and rainwater harvesting with artificial recharge of the groundwater, which obviously is useful, but it's important to maintain and safeguard the traditional users of those areas. In my first picture, there was a man collecting fodder for his cattle. So people still continue to do these things despite the fact it's heavily polluted. So to cut them out completely would destroy their livelihoods or affect them quite considerably. Demand side solutions. So if you're going to price water at all, price it in a way that allows for people to be able to pay or at least subsidise for the poorest. Quite important to kind of raise awareness that groundwater is a common resource, that just because you have built an apartment or a luxury farmhouse and you drill a bore well, that doesn't make that water underneath your home yours. It's like we all have a straw in a Coke bottle, and some of us have shorter straws than others, and if one of us drinks a lot, then the water will still go down. So we have to think about that. And regularised and planned urbanisation. This is a huge kind of policy matter, but we have perhaps decentralised sewage treatment plants is the way forward, particularly for peri-urban areas who are so far from the piped supply system. And also looking at full cycle sanitation, which is something that was highlighted in the urban policy dialogues for me, and it's something that I perhaps stupidly hadn't thought of. I just immediately thought, oh, toilet, that's great. But if your toilet is simply being pumped out with a honeysucker, which is then exporting it into a lake, then isn't that just open defecation at scale? So, to quote someone at Urban Policy Dialogues. So, yeah, so that's my research, and yeah. Yeah, so challenges and limitations. So I'd never done research before, ever, let alone in another country, so it was a real experience and enjoyable to do it, but also quite a challenge. I use a translator, which was a challenge as well, and I think my lack of language ability in Kannada is a letdown for me. My data collection happened at one point in time, so that could affect my findings as well. Restricted site selection, primarily because I couldn't go really, really far away, but I think that would be really useful to see how more about the flows of goods and services. And yeah, a study like this, I think, requires a lot more time and in-depth research and observation of actually what is going on within households specifically. But yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I just want to go back to the reciprocal training of the slide, and maybe you talk a little bit about it, or maybe talk a little bit more about it in the context of what you found and how you put it in research.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is. Can you hear me? This is something I actually still have to work out whether I'm going to use it, because it is so all-encompassing and very broad framework. But I think, if anything, it's good to highlight the drivers of peri-urban spaces. So, in which case I'll probably use it for that, and then use a more vulnerability lens to go into detail into my own findings, I think. But yeah, sorry.
And the other question I had was, were you able to get into any health-related questions with
Yeah, so I... Oh, sorry. Sorry. Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah, no, that's something I wanted to find out. So I asked people what were the main health issues that they faced, and they gave a long list of issues that they came across. So things like mosquitoes, again, huge, dengue, malaria, fever, coughs, colds, and so I will map that. I will plot that in my thesis. But whether or not you could associate it with water is difficult, and that was difficult for the households as well to say. But considering how groundwater can be contaminated by polluted water bodies, there may or may not be a connection. But unfortunately, I couldn't do water testing when I was in the field, so I couldn't find out. But
so while you were interviewing, who were your interviewees in terms of from the household? Interviewed women, men, mix, or?
yeah, so I interviewed men and women, and if I couldn't have the interview with the head of house, then I had it with like the eldest son or the partner or eldest daughter or things like that. But it was a mix of men and women.
The answers vary.
Yeah, so I'm yet to go into that much detail into my analysis, but that's something that I'd be interested to find out, whether the answers change. But quite a lot of the interviews happened with the whole household as well, and everyone was chipping in at one time. So, yeah, depended on the interview.
Have you found any significant differences between the three sites, or are they all a very similar story?
I think, yeah, they were quite different. Vartour was particularly interesting because you still had farming going on, and a lot of the tankers. I interviewed some of the tanker drivers in Vartour as well, to find out where they were going, and yeah, a lot more mix of how people get water in Vartour. So from tanker to some people might have pipes from the community bore well, but some people have tankers, some have bottled. Some people have invested in a sump as well. So that was a lot, a lot more mixed. Whereas people in the north near Tanisandra, a lot of they had a community bore well which they use all the time, and it was only people really on the outskirts of the village who were far away from it that struggled.
So are you going to, in your thesis, analyze the different processes of peri-urbanization and relate that to the difference that you have found in these three sites?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to bring it back to peri-urban spaces and how they form or not. Because I don't know whether my sample size is too small in each case to be that specific, or whether I need to just do a broader focus.
You mentioned only 5 typologies in area which you found very useful. I mean, did these 3 sites sort of fall within those in different ways? Like, what were those 5 typologies?
Yeah, so Vartor, if you look at Google Maps, was very much a village, a rural village, and it's still maintained that village. So I would say that was trying to think of the typologies.
Absorption of the
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so being absorbed by the growing city, and the other two, yeah, I think similarly, it's kind of a similar typology. The north was particularly influenced by the airport, so a lot of people mentioned, oh, it's because the airport's here, all these people are moving in. But yeah, I think I need to go back to that paper and identify exactly which typology these sites fit under.
Can you just share some experiences doing field research? As you said, this is not your first time. So, like, I mean, in terms of walking into a household, like, how do you think they perceived you and, like, your translator? Did it take time for them to open up? Were there certain things that they were kind of dodgy or answering?
Yeah. So on the whole, people were really, really receptive, and they wanted to speak to us. There was only, I think, one person who said, no, I don't have time for you, kind of thing, which is understandable. I mean, people have lots of things to do, and I had quite a long questionnaire for them to go through. But yeah, the majority were very receptive and wanted to speak to us. I guess one kind of limitation perhaps is the fact that I am an outsider, and the risk is that people may exaggerate the issues, and maybe they're not as bad as they are, perhaps, which is a challenge, I think. And also a challenge to say that I'm a student, and it's not even a PhD, it's a master's, and just because I'm here doesn't mean it's going to improve. So trying to tell people that, I'm here just as a student and it's a project, and yeah, that's quite a challenge to get across.
Did they ask you a lot of questions about yourself, like why you were there? Like, was there like that kind of a back and forth, or was it going in, doing the questionnaire, saying thank you?
Yeah, it depended on each case. Some people were quite interested, they wanted to know what was going on, and particularly people in, particularly the poorer ones, so informal settlements, they wanted to know that what I was doing was important, and that I would go back and tell my government, and they would tell the Indian government, and that it would all be resolved, which I had told my translator very clearly, that you have to say this is not the case, this is not happening, because I wouldn't. That's really false expectations on my work and what this is capable of. So, yeah.
Sort of just to add to that, when Hannah set out on one of her first visits as scoping, even we were with her, and initially we really thought that especially people in the urban are not going to be receptive to you walking in and asking some questions. But quite contrary to that, every place that we went to, they were quite open to sort of talking to us. They did give us at least about 10 to 15 minutes, and then they said you could come back on a day that they're more free to talk to us. But there was no resistance as such in terms of engaging with people like us. And remember that community near in North Bangalore, they were quite clear about the fact that, yeah, we understand you're students, you can't do much about it. I mean, even before we had to say that, they themselves sort of
have this flexible approach to other projects or similar studies.
Well, this particular place apparently not. I mean, there are no NGOs, there are no other people. I think they were just happy that we were speaking to them, you know, because they're quite isolated as such. Like, there's somebody who's asking them about their situation.
Yeah.
But quite contrary to the feeling that, you know, urban who are not, especially in peri-urban areas, don't have the time or are not willing to talk to people. It turned out quite the other way around.
Yeah, and definitely because a lot of people said that, like the local government or local officials never came, and it was only during elections. So I think the fact some people, someone was asking them, "How's your situation?" Was quite novel. So they wanted to express the situation that they faced.
Just 2 points. One, that given the sample size is so small, you know what in your final presentation give like actual numbers
Yeah.
and not just reduce them to percentages because
Yeah.
there are only 30 households.
Yeah.
Percentages just give a different,
Yeah.
I don't know, that's what
Yeah, no, it's good.
I felt. And another thing, did you do like that settlement profiling in terms of what's happening overall, even if through key informant interviews?
I haven't yet, no.
Because I think that will, even from secondary or you can go back now,
Yeah.
give a context of each, I think that will differentiate
Yeah.
a little bit of their history, what their arrangements are, when did they come in, and if you can have that and then those 10 households, I think that will be in presentation it will be good. And also
Okay.
few detailed maybe household case studies where you have spoken more. I mean you won't have gotten equal information from
Yeah.
the 30 households I
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
So if you can take maybe 4, 5 and present those, I think that will really enrich this.
Okay.
Also, if you notice in the interviews, we've already done the interviews, but if you remember, if there were things people were hesitant to answer, and there were things people were slightly biased to talk about, like not sending your kid to school because they're not washed. I mean, things that, because these things have implications on your life stages.
Yeah.
So that would be interesting to see if that could be woven into when you talk about the kind of data you have.
Yeah. One thing that was, because I kind of wanted to get at hygiene practice, and that was something that was difficult to get at. And yeah, as you're probably well aware, and that's why I think observation and being there for a long time to actually see how people behave would be so beneficial to this, because asking people simply, do you wash your hands and when do you wash your hands is irrelevant really, because they're bound to say yes we do and yes we use soap.
I agree to that point that people would say, I mean, we would always assume that people will say yes to that. While we did that in Bihar, we found contrary answers also.
Okay.
Like we put in questions like, do you wear footwears while you go out? I just assumed that everybody will say yes. But there were people who said, no, we don't have. I mean, or like washing hands. So everybody was washing hands before cooking, but many people were not washing before eating. So it was, we just put in thinking that we will get like obvious answers, but sometimes it was surprising that. So I believe that we should obviously have observations, but we should have those questions as well. We might be surprised.
Yeah.
I think if we can, and you could share with maybe career team, if it's possible to share the transcript and the details of these households, maybe we could also select some of them for the longitudinal study and go back to them and keep, we have some database for now and then keep collecting. I don't know, if you have identified some households that you can go back to and get more information, I think that should be
Yeah, I'll have a look.
One last question.
Yeah.
About the migration that you mentioned. So were you actually looking at individuals within your household or like the overall household moving inside?
The overall household.
Okay. But were they also, like children who went to wanted other jobs and
Sorry, were
were
there
there
children?
also children who would move away for other jobs or other members, specific members of the household moving elsewhere for work?
Yeah, so some of the households reported higher incomes because their children had moved out or were working elsewhere. Is that what you mean, or do you mean in migration from other states?
Yeah, a lot of the in-migration were farmers, so we'd bring the whole family from North Karnataka. And yeah.
Great, and if there aren't any more questions, thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
When do you have to submit this?
End of October. Have some time, yeah.
Are you off?
Next week, Wednesday. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback.